B2B Ecommerce, and we're very lucky to be joined by Steve Kemish. Steve is the managing partner of Junction Agency, who are a B2B marketing communications specialist. Steve's also a tutor at the Institute of Direct Marketing and a fellow, youngest ever. 20 plus years in B2B, so we're going to have a lot of wealth of experience that we can tap today. So Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. Let's kick off talking about the market. When we talk about e-commerce, most people's minds go B2C. And the big word on the street this year is that B2B e-com is going to be a bigger growth space. Why has it been so slow to adopt e-commerce, and what's the opportunity for B2B in e-com?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. If you look at a broader trend, that often B2B, forget e-commerce, tends to be behind the curve for consumer. So I think you're just seeing the same trends with e-commerce that we might have seen for communication and advertising, adoption of things. So social media, for example, consumer brands typically get to these things, play with them first. I think there's a heritage of being a bit more safe or a bit slower moving.
Yep.
So I think that's an element of it. I think the bigger one for commerce with B2B, and I've worked in B2B e-commerce, I've flirted with consumer brands, and we do a bit of work. Most of my life has been since the turn of the century in B2B and e-commerce. That space doesn't always lend itself as easily to e-commerce as consumers would do.
Yep.
It's too simplistic to say, well, if you're B2B, the product or the service is too expensive or too complex, or the way your customer buys or how long it takes to buy means e-commerce would never work, right? And I think that's been part of it as well. There's just been this, oh, well, it's too difficult, customers won't want it aspect to it, so we've been a bit apathetic. But then, of course, B2B is such a wide spectrum. There's been a large number of organisations that have sold simpler, lower cost, lower complexity products online through the B2B space for a long time. They just don't get put into that same press. So I think there's a whole kind of maelstrom of things that have stopped us from pulling our finger out, frankly, and getting on with it.
Okay, cool. Well, hopefully we'll dig into some of those. Out of interest, why do you think that B2B brands are slow to the starting blocks when it comes to getting on new technologies? What's the ethos in the marketeer's mind of a B2B marketeer that makes them maybe less willing to be the ones that stick their neck out versus consumer?
Well, I think that's a part of it, is the risk, is that people fearful of being the early adopters, of doing something that's what you might call bleeding edge, so too soon.
Yep.
I think it's broader than that. It's probably a cultural thing. So you've got organisations that are consumer focused, where, and certainly from my lifetime of TV being a main advertising means when I grew up, consumer brands are used to taking risks with things like TV advertising and out home. B2B is not so relevant for them. So I think there's just been that perceived lack of places to go and play, like the cool consumer kids can go and do in marketing. So that's meant we've reverted to type. And anything drives me insane about B2B, it's that legacy of you and I, men in suits, shaking hands in front of a glass building, and that is business to business. So this has been really kind of staid, safe approach to things, which has just meant the speed is slower.
Right.
That said, I think the world has moved, because we've digitalised so much in the last 2 decades, but particularly in the last 5 years, the hand's almost been forced.
Yeah.
Couple that with businesses, need to be as commercially savvy as possible. I think a lot of boardrooms have woken up literally to the fact that maybe we're not going to make more money, but what can we do from a savings point of view? So the commercial imperative suddenly comes in that says, okay, rather than this being a competitive advantage, if we don't do this, we're missing out, we're not going to survive. We've got to go through that overused phrase, but important one, digital transformation.
Digital transformation, yes. Yeah. If we all had £1 for every time we'd heard that phrase. It's really interesting. I think a lot of your points, just want to unpack some of those there, because
Sure.
I think there's a lot to digest in that. And I think one of the things that we're definitely seeing more and more, to echo what you've said, is this realization that there isn't the sort of the work self and then the home self, and you don't put on your suit and become work Steve Kemish, and then you take off your suit and become home Steve Kemish. You're Steve Kemish, and the things you like and the way you like to buy and ease and speed and all these other things they remain prevalent to you, whether you're buying, I assume, stationery for the office, or whether you probably don't buy stationery for your own office anymore, far too poor for that, but whether you're...
I still lick my own stamps.
You still lick your own stamps, yeah, as part of the digital transformation. Yeah. But so I think that realization, whether we're talking about it from like a careers point of view, or whether we're talking about it from a just how do we reach people, how do we market to people, I think, as you're saying, some brands are realizing that, but it seems to be that there is a massive spectrum which is much broader than I would say there is in B2C. In B2C, there's a lot of brands that maybe do stuff a lot worse, but they're still probably doing the same things. They might just be doing it really, really badly compared to the top person in the market. Whereas in B2B, it feels like there's some people which aren't doing any of the things that some of the top people are doing. And so the chasm seems to be much, much wider. And it's just going to be interesting to see how that, I guess, what your thoughts are on how that starts to come together and what digital transformation really actually means. Which is
we'll be here a while. Look, there's a lot of really good points in there. I think the one, firstly, that persona of business person versus home or consumer, you're right. I think there's a lot more awareness of human to human, B2B, B2C. And in fact, one of the things I do every year is I do a guest lecture at a couple of universities with undergrads and talk to them about B2B. When they're going into careers, they're all desperate to go into consumer because that's where, even as an industry, it seems is all the cool stuff happens. And the first thing I'll always start with is go, look, what's the difference between B2B and B2C? Very little. There are a couple of important points that certainly we should talk about when it comes to commerce, because they do affect that. But we're not Lego people. We don't pop off ahead and then go back into home versus work. So I think there's more awareness, or more openness to the fact that business to business is to humans. And the things that drive humans, the emotional decisions that people make, the rational decisions, that mix, that we can learn more from consumer brands than we were perhaps willing. There's a snobbery almost of, they're the kids that have got the jeans and t-shirts versus us in our pinstripe suits. And we've recognised we can learn. I think there's also been an interesting pressure. It's what I would call, and it's nothing other than my saying, but the Amazon effect, which is because brands like Amazon have become so prevalent and so many people have used and bought online from Amazon, and it's been so easy and convenient. There's almost an unconscious pressure on business brands or any brand to say, well, why can't I buy your stationery from you online? Why can't I place an order for this very expensive thing online? If Amazon can do it, why can't you? So I think we've had to pull our socks up from a pressure, but the transformation is the opportunity. I like the positive things. Is, as I said, it could be cost saving. So why would you go through digital transformation? To make your current approach more efficient, to complement rather than conflict at a basic level. B2B brands that might sell would be very reliant on catalogues and print materials. Digital isn't there, in my opinion, to remove that entirely. It's there to complement it.
Okay.
And actually a lot of organisations we work with, we work a lot in the B2B tech space, so brands that sell hardware and software. A catalogue or a tangible printed thing is still really important in the sales process in B2B. It still is in consumer. If you've got those high price ticket, high consideration purchases. If you're buying a house, for example, as a consumer, that's something that's a very long, typically a longer sales cycle. It's a much more considered purchase. And having a brochure for that house is nice, tangible. So there's that aspect of digital transformation. Isn't about forget all the old stuff we used to do. It's all about digital. I think it's where it can complement and make efficiency savings, or perhaps even further than that, you can suddenly go into new markets. In this country, with our lack of manufacturing now, there are lots of niche B2B brands. I was listening to one on the radio yesterday that do robotics. The reason they're thriving up in Yorkshire, Leeds, Yorkshire, is they've got the whole world they can sell to. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, they would have sold to the country, possibly even just the area of the country. So there's a whole set of ingredients of great stuff that means, rather than it being a negative for me, I think we've got a much bigger shop and store to play in, that just, the world is literally our oyster.
Yeah, indeed.
To use a terrible phrase.
No, it's a good phrase. I was just thinking, I mean, if you, I don't know how many people in Leeds or Yorkshire need to buy a robot or robotics, but I'm assuming that without the internet, there's probably
good point.
But
So we don't
internationalisation.
suddenly get regionalised.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's Leeds. We could put them in Southampton
London,
or
indeed,
Birmingham, as we are
Yeah,
today, and it's that proximity that.
Great.
How many organisations in the square footage of us and our postcode, you've suddenly got a lot more places to play in.
Yeah,
it does come with challenges though, and actually with the B2B e-commerce hat on, the challenge is if you suddenly can open up to other markets, what does that mean for things like shipping and returns and payment and all those areas? And I think that's one of the very simple barriers to entry for B2B compared to consumer for e-commerce is even if the sell isn't that much more complex, the purchase can be because of the way businesses tend to buy. They'll want the paper trail, they might want to pay by invoice terms rather than you and I as consumers will just flip a credit card and put the last 3 digits on the back end.
Or purchase orders and
Absolutely.
procurement approval and all that
right.
kind
And
of
I think
stuff.
therefore that's also intellectually been a thing for B2B brands is, that seems a bit complicated. How are we ever going to tackle it? And I don't think there's been the need to tackle it. So we've had this forced transformation as well as those that want to go through it. And for me, that's often because those brands a bit lazy and have missed the key point is they're not talking to their customers about, well, what is it that they want? So I'll give you an example. We've worked for a number of years with a very large outsourced hospitality and catering company. Okay. So they will run all sorts of things. They ran 2012 Olympics. They would do the catering, the hospitality people, pulling pints, giving out wine, directing people to car parks, etc. And one of their main clients is Royal Ascot. So Royal Ascot, the big race meeting, they'll run various events throughout the year. Ascot's 5 days coming up very soon in this month, June. They sell tickets, B2B tickets, as well as consumer, because you and I can go to the races, but businesses often will buy hospitality, B2B purchase. And they came to us a number of years ago and said, look, we need to build an e-commerce store. And we sat there and thought the assumption was, for the £50 tickets to get those through as quick as possible. No, it's for the £10,000 a day tables on their very high-end products. So they've got customers that are so loyal. The problem is that the only other way of buying at the moment is over the phone. And these £10,000 tables get caught in the same phone queues as people buying £50 tickets for their business. And they just needed a very simple e-commerce store to say, look, if you know what you're buying, this is how you buy it, and you just hit a few buttons and it's done like that. Amazing. It goes against everything I'd have thought. It's £10,000. Surely they'll want weeks of consideration and all sorts of rich media content and a brochure posting out. No, in those instances, for those loyal customers, they just wanted the speed and convenience of, we know what we want, just give me the button to confirm it as quick as possible. So I think there's that mindset we've had is, if it's not a small ticket item, it won't ever buy or sell online. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
I just want to pick up on that actually, because you talked again a little bit earlier about this idea of it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to digital transformation. If you're doing a catalogue or whatever it is, a brochure, there's still an element for that, especially for high ticket items. But digital can augment and complement that, maybe even in the e-commerce sense. It's a really interesting example, the idea that actually this brand that we're talking about now have actually gone for their highest ticket item. And tried to digitalise that because for those very logical reasons once you start to unpack them. Do you think that some B2B brands are shying away from e-com because they just have this unfounded or unsubstantiated belief that what they're selling is, quote, too expensive, quote, too complicated? No, you need to speak to Jeff in sales if anyone's ever going to buy this, massive franking machine or whatever it is, rather than actually going, well, people are looking at catalogues and then calling up and buying something. Surely that's a relatively similar journey, except you've got Jeff in the middle to answer some questions and give a voice to it. I mean,
I think the trouble is, it's a very long answer because it's not as simple, because as you mentioned, B2B is such a wide church of different industries and different products and services and solutions that the mindset is, well, it's B2B, it must be more expensive and complex. But we can find around the corner somebody who's B2B that sells a £3 thing, and then round the other corner someone that sells a £3 million thing, and everywhere in between is B2B. So my learning, I first inherited an e-commerce business or division of a business in the B2B IT space in 2000. It had been running for 18 months, and it was selling hardware and software from a £5 mouse for your computer or laptop back then, all the way up through to software and systems and hardware that may well come in at high six figures. Very wide catalogue of products. It had been running for 18 months, and it had done £36,000 worth of revenue in that 18 months. We were put together as a team that ran it, and 5 years later it was a £20 million division, which sounds wow, and it was a bit wow. I'm very proud of it still. But if you unpack it, there were two areas that we got success from. One is we got the low value, low complexity product, the mice and keyboards, that if we hadn't done that, the salespeople had to sell over the phone or when they went on field visits, believe it or not, which they hated because it was intellectually below them, but also practically there's no commission from that. No, quite right. So what we did is we basically said, well, how do we get rid of some of the run rate stuff that makes our sales colleagues' lives easier? And this is a critical thing for me that I've learned with marketing, B2B particularly, is you've got to take sales on the journey. Too many marketing functions are divorced from sales. The sales and marketing alignment thing is big in B2B. Shouldn't be, but it's often the arrogance of we know best. Whereas if you go and talk to sales, what do you want? Well, we want to get rid of the crap little stuff. Then the other end of the spectrum, where that 20 million tag came from, was we then we developed a system that allowed for online quoting of those much more complex, expensive purchases. So the sale didn't happen in the same way that somebody would flip a credit card and spend £67,000 on something. But they could do the configuration, they could build the product, basically I need 30 computers and a server, how much is that going to cost, and I want this processor and this, all the very technical bits. Self-serve, which means it was more efficient. They also felt they were in control as a customer. They would create that as a quote, which the purchasing process often needs for businesses, because it needs to raise a PO or to get somebody to say yes to it, or many people say yes to it. And it then immediately went into the sales cycle for us in our CRM system. So basically 85% of the sale happened. The last 15% was then the salesperson that gave, and Jeff, in your example, who's important, because he gives that human reassurance back to the emotional bit of, do you want to make a mistake when you spend £5 online? Not really. But you definitely don't want to make a mistake when you're spending £65,000 online. So the human element's still really critical in B2B. Is Jeff's job was easy. He would pick up all they'd done and often just say, yep, you're about to make a right choice, sir or madam. So the e-commerce was doing all the legwork for the salespeople to then take the commission. So I think there's a real opportunity still in a lot of organisations to say, how do we audit and work out where could we do some B2B? Is it to, as I said, make salespeople more efficient, which indirectly is a good cost saver as well as a great motivator? Can we go somewhere in that journey or not? And back to your catalogue point, my whole career has been digital, but I'm very ambivalent about whether we use digital to solve a problem. If the answer is we should use a catalogue because it's the better way of doing it for the customer, that's how we do it. If they want a printed order format, because in public sector, for example, particularly in government, it can be still very traditional. We can go and build an e-commerce store or have an agency that pitches this idea, and we think we're amazingly cool because we're like, an eBay store, and then the industry's not ready for it. So that's another factor: is has the business looked at themselves versus what's the industry dynamic? Are we about to spend money or change something that frankly isn't broken?
So one of the things I really want to unpack from that element of what you just said was the areas I think if people are listening that they can really take away and start to think about. One was obviously sales and marketing alignment. So how can you as a marketing function, if you're in B2B and you're looking to find digital opportunities, how can you maybe use the sales team's areas that they don't want to be touching, or products that they hate selling, or areas where there's not going to be friction, they're going to actually be on board with the idea of making their lives simpler or easier, what salesperson isn't. And then the other piece is also the auditing of your product catalogue. So perhaps there's low-hanging fruit that is very repeat purchase, the £10,000 ticket, the £5 mouse or whatever it is, where actually the incremental, even emotional value of a salesperson is going to be really low. So is there a way of seeding those products as their starting point? And I think the other thing that you said, which I think is a really important thing for the listeners to take on board, is this idea of customer first decision making. So just because it exists and just because it's sexy, even though obviously we're talking about e-commerce and obviously try to promote that more, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right for everyone. And potentially the way your buyers buy, if they're maybe a bit more fuddy-duddy or a bit more bureaucratic or old school, paper and pen, or maybe even quill and something else, then building an e-commerce site is not necessarily going to be the best move. And so I think there's a number of things that for people listening, they need to look at and consider when they're thinking about those particular steps and whether e-com or digital transformation is going to be right for them. One of the other things I just wanted to bring into the mix, which again is very much at the moment considered in the consumer world, but I think crouching in, I'm going to roll with it, crouching into the B2B world, is the concept of reviews and kind of non-owned brand status. So, we've obviously been going through this generational shift where B2B brands or people who were selling had all the control. Now customers have all the control, buyers have all the information, people speak to salespeople later and later. We know the stats and the trends. But reviews is something that I don't hear talked about perhaps as much as it could or should be when it comes to B2B. What's your, view of B2B reviews and how much they should be actively trying to manage their reputation online versus maybe having it managed for them?
Yeah, okay. Again, it's back to the humanistic nature of things. We've always been humans. We've just taken a while to recognise and come back to it. From a behavioural science point of view, social proof, the idea that you're going to make a good decision because other people like you do it. And in consumer form on the web, TripAdvisor.com, for example, Amazon reviews absolutely embody that. They're entirely irrational, by the way. So if you think about TripAdvisor, that's for a hotel review, and we're making a decision on a hotel to stay in Rome, we've never been to, you and I as humans are basically saying, I'm going to read the review of somebody I've never met, I've no idea whether their basis of comparison for a hotel room is the same as mine, but I'm going to trust them more than I am the industry that's selling to me. Now, that's a really important point, because that's the irrational, the emotional bit. So that driver, you're absolutely right, should be there for B2B. Why has it not been there? Again, it could be back to that slight lag. I think the more acceptable excuse is, it's quite, I know this from practice in the organisation I work in, we write quite a lot of case studies, which are the posh longhand version of a review. It is quite difficult in some industries to get a customer to put their name to what they're doing. So Amazon, if you and I buy a £10 cable and go, that's really helpful, it plugged into the back of my TV, it's not sensitive information. Whereas we work with a global tech company in B2B who sell into retail. One of their many customers is the largest supermarket brand in the UK. They spend a lot of money with them, but they won't ever put their name to a case study, which is that equivalent to review. Because it's competitive information, they can't be seen to be showing their competitors what they're doing. So it can be sensitive information. There can be regulatory or legislative restrictions. So in banking, for example, you just may not be able to say what it is you're doing, or in military, or again, we work with an antivirus and security company who do amazing things to protect from things like hacking and malware. Well, their clients won't necessarily want to say, this is how we protect from malware, because then all the hackers can find a way in. So there are practical reasons why it doesn't happen, but I don't think we should be looking for a like for like. Reviews, the principle of endorsement is what we're looking for. So a review might not be it, but a testimonial is an easier, palatable way of doing it B2B. By that, simply a client putting their name to a sentence or two that says, we bought this product, it was great. It doesn't often need to be much more than that. And the why a testimonial, if you go up the kind of hierarchy, reviews that consumers, you and I, are used to, testimonial, a similar, a one or two sentence piece from a customer, and then a case study, which in our money is often a couple of pages or a video of it. The case studies are great if you can get those, but they're longer, they're harder, they'll come less. But a testimonial, me saying to you, would you mind putting your name to this sentence? And that is a top tip for me, is don't let a customer who's happy with you in B2B write a testimonial, because it may not be particularly useful to you. They'll say things like, Jeff's really great, he always picks up the phone, or he likes to take me to golf and that's why I buy the product. But if you can dictate and say, look, are you willing to put your name to it? And sorry, the other non-facetious bit to that is often customers don't know what to say. Oh, I love what you do, we're really loyal to you, but I wouldn't know how to express.
Yeah.
So if you do it for them. So I think if you can get testimonials, those are a really good way of countering that problem around sensitivity with customers or industry, the regulatory or that we can't share with competition. Go close to the review system. Case studies on top of that also give that heavyweight value. The testimonials, I think, come in from a sales cycle earlier as well. So if someone's in that journey of buying, as you said, we've got far more information available to us as buyers than we've ever had. And a salesperson, Challenger of Sales book talks about 57% of the sales cycle's done before the salesperson gets a chance to get involved. So I think testimonials are that social proof point. We're not about to make a bad decision, are we? No. Oh, look, someone that is in our industry's used this, it must work. Then it goes down that journey, that then a more in-depth case study might be the clincher when that salesperson's in the room. So long answer, but the other bit, again from painful experience, that we mustn't try and do is just mirror consumer. So I've worked with when I worked client side for the first half of my career, in brands where we said, let's do a review system like Amazon's got. And you need a critical mass of customers. This is the other problem for B2B brands. If you don't sell to many people, you might have even thousands of customers. That isn't enough as a critical mass of people that care about you to then be motivated to write a review. And there's the one thing worse than having no reviews on the system is one review on the system for your product, and it's the one person that writes the 1 star or even 5 star, and it looks like
no one's really bothered.
That was your mum that's written a review for you. So you know
that you sent to her mum. Can you
yeah,
say
exactly,
this?
Absolutely. It doesn't give. It comes off as negative. It doesn't look positive. It looks like it's been manufactured. So you want to be genuine, or to use an overused phrase in our world at the moment, authentic with how you get those customers to do the selling for you.
So you found, just picking up before we kind of recap some of those things, there's some really good points in there. You found it previously that this issue of critical mass almost prevented B2B from leveraging more Amazon-esque type review systems. But what about things like the ubiquity of being able to review? So now, Google has reviews, Facebook has reviews, Trustpilot has pages, even if the company's not registered themselves to be on Trustpilot, you can go and review a brand or a company. To what extent, a B2B brand's ignoring maybe that wider ecosystem of non-owned review platforms that may well be saying stuff about them that they're not engaging in conversation. Glassdoor is another example that we come across a lot.
Absolutely, the employee bit. Yeah, I agree, and the answer to the problem that we had with that brand, where we tried to do it ourselves, was we went out to the likes of Revu that are those aggregated reviews, because a lot of the products in that organisation, because we were a reseller, a lot of those products were sold by others. So there was a critical mass of reviews that we could use. Plus, the other important point is the infrastructure. So I utterly agree with, if you can go to somebody that's already got it built, you don't have to build it. Silly point, but
valuable, yeah.
Often one of the reasons that things don't get done on e-commerce or in digital is the IT department are too busy. It's one of those classic, well, that's only a 10-minute thing to do, but it will take 6 months and 10 minutes, because it will take 6 months to get IT resource ready, 10 minutes to do it. So if you can find a best of breed out there, in any aspect of life, I'm a huge advocate of just use people that are experts at what they do. Wrong word. Don't ever use anyone that's an expert. So on LinkedIn, for example, if they use the word expert,
guru.
Indeed. Anybody that uses the word expert on something is probably not an expert. If you really are expert, you don't need to tell people you are. So be careful of that. But use people that are good at best of breed services. So in your world, I wouldn't want to build an online chat facility myself. I'd much rather go to people that know how to do it, because it'll be quicker and better, frankly. And that, I think, can follow through a lot of these aspects. The other point of my don't do reviews versus case studies, testimonials, again, it's too simplistic. I come from a mindset of B2B, often for me, is organisations that do sell that much more expensive, complex stuff that takes months or years even. But RS Components, for example, who sell a myriad of different products, they are a business-to-business brand, but they're so much closer to consumer behaviour. I think they definitely will have a review system. So it's not as black and white as if you're B2B, don't do what consumer do. There's that grey area in the middle from a functional point of view as well as from that humanistic or emotional point of view.
Yeah, so I think there was a couple of things that really struck me there, and just I want to make sure we encapsulate them. So for our listeners here, I think the hierarchy of reviews was really useful. There's your Amazon S type, either own published or wider reviews, then your testimonials, and Steve, your top tip there was write it for them, get them to sign it off, reuse it, and then there's your larger sort of case studies, maybe with videos or multi-page content and some of the challenges around producing those. The thing as well I just wanted to get your input on is, I don't know if you found, but we've certainly found that people's BS detector is kind of off the chain at the moment, and even sometimes in some industries where we'll have video case studies or testimonials, the question will still come, well, how's it going to, maybe it's not going to work for me type thing, when it's almost exactly the same, and you're kind of sat there going, well, I mean, what more proof do you want? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But how can, I guess, B2B brands, you brought up the challenger sale, the amount that buyers are researching themselves and coming to salespeople later and later in their decision-making process, and maybe with e-commerce, if at all, how can B2B get used to not being able to control the conversation a bit? Because it feels like there's still some friction in terms of B2B knows that the buyers have way more power and kind of have started to adjust to it in terms of taking on inbound and content marketing and these kinds of things. But there's also, it feels like this feeling of, well, we don't really actually want to be doing this stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like estate agents. We don't really want to be online. We have to be. Yeah, because someone like, damn the internet. We've gone to the good old days of where we could just send people what we wanted and they had to call us and all that kind of stuff. So not really a specific question, but I'd love you to just riff on that topic if you got anything.
Well, it's funny. So it's that, again, that apathy or a change is a thing that a lot of humans just very broadly are fearful of. So if you are somebody who has been in an industry, and I think it's easy to say, but typically is true, is you meet an industry and everyone says, oh, it's really incestuous. Everyone knows everyone in this industry. But every industry I've ever worked in is the same. So when you're in an industry, particularly B2B, you tend to stay in it. And therefore, if you've been in it a while, you're used to things being done in a certain traditional way. Traditional doesn't mean print, it could still be traditional digital.
Sure.
So the appetite to change is one that's a challenge. And again, and I think for B2B marketing, the salespeople are so important. I once tried to argue this and was flamed down by the marketing community for the fact that I think good B2B marketing people should just acquiesce to sales and say, what do you want? What makes your life easier? I'll build that, or I'll change that to make it happen for you. You can then get the glamour and buy the fur coats and the fast cars and be commissioned for stuff. I'll know in the background that I'm doing my job properly. Interestingly, as a side note, in Estonia, I spoke at a B2B marketing conference a couple of years ago. I thought it was a B2B marketing conference because that's what I do, and I got there and the organiser said 10 minutes before going on stage, oh, what you talk about is great, but just know in Estonia, B2B marketing isn't the name of our industry. Our industry is called sales support. It's a really interesting point in terms of that whole country sees B2B marketing as something to support the selling of stuff. Okay, so salespeople, amongst others, are fearful. I was introduced to the Salesforce that we took that £36,000 e-commerce division to 20 million at a sales kickoff, 500 salespeople at a regional conference centre in a forgettable part of this country, and the sales director almost verbatim said, this is Steve, he's from the internet, he's here to show you how our .com is going to make many of you redundant. Steve, over to you. Right, that was the intro that I was given by the sales director, who quite clearly wasn't very keen on this idea of change.
I also just quickly, I love this is Steve from the internet. Yeah, like you're some sort of mythical digital person. They just downloaded steve.exe.
Right. I'm an avatar. For the listener's sake, just we'll just tap on the arm.
He is real. We did record this live. Yes, this isn't some sort of AR.
No, it's not, we've not stumbled into some kind of Black Mirror territory.
Steve from the internet. We might use that in the headline of this at some point.
That's
so God, yeah, with Steve from the internet.
My nickname is the internet, so that's fine.
Capitalised.
Yeah, filtered. Yeah. Anyway, the point of that was, there's clearly a fear. And again, where we counted, and it wasn't just me, I had a team of people that were great. It was as much PR, internal PR. So again, back to that point of what if we build it and it's not right for the customer, but don't forget the intermediaries of the salespeople. And where we won hearts and minds was, again, to that, we removed the low value stuff that they hated doing. It was a waste of their time. We helped tee up those more complex sales, and more accurately, by the way, because if we could get the configurator tools online for them, for the customers to use, it minimised the chance of a salesperson misinterpreting what the customer wants, because they're salespeople, they're not technical people selling. Yep. There's another critical department to come in as well, actually. So back to the reviews of what if we can't do reviews, a good halfway house would be just solving frequently asked questions. So customer service is another gold mine for me in B2B organisations. Whether that's sitting in on a customer call or going through CRM logs to see whether it's audio or written. Some of the success I've had, I think you'll have for any B2B e-commerce space, is again, if you can't complete the sale, how much of the objection handling can you do? So again, in that IT world, we'd have a really popular product that was a £50 piece of software. It was a £50 piece of software that taught maths in schools. And the three key questions, if you look at and listen in to the customer service team, or the telephone sales team that were about to handle a service stroke sale, was, hello, I just want to check three things. Is it a piece of software? Yes, it is. Is it £50? Yes, it is. Does it teach maths? Yes, it does. Right? All of those things were on the web product page, but it taught me a really valuable lesson. You mustn't miss that human reassurance that we need. I mentioned earlier that I don't think there's a great difference between consumer and B2B. The one clear one for me is when you buy, you and I, if we buy as consumers, with exception, house purchases, etc., it's our money and we devolve back to, we defer to us. Am I happy to spend this money? I am. Okay. In B2B, it's always someone else's money. Even if you're the owner manager of the business, you need to have an audit trail. So that's another thing from a digital point of view is, what about post-sale? Can you make their life easier by giving them via email or some other means the piece for their expenses they need? And again, you'd be amazed how many e-commerce stores don't recognise this and don't give you a receipt that you can use easily. But even that £50 piece of software, again, the emotional bit that can be an objection is, I don't want to be the one that gets it wrong. The old adage, I'm sure you're familiar with, is nobody got fired for buying IBM.
Yeah.
It's that in terms of nobody got fired for using Amazon, right? Is you don't want to then buy a £50 piece of software from the leader and then go, you're wrong. So the human bit, not just the sale, but the service bit's critical as well, is can you empower them or indeed learn from them and make sure that, and what we did with that product page was we had 3 bullet points rather than features and benefits under the product of the 3 objections that most people had.
Is this software? Yes.
Yeah, not quite written like that, but in a way that...
So it's very clear you're
absolutely.
taking out that key area.
Or indeed, if you go further from an e-commerce point of view, from a scenario selling point of view, often people, why you buy a piece of software, it's not because you like software, it's trying to solve a problem. So again, from a scenario point of view, and 2 really powerful words from a selling point of view are ideal for. Ideal for ... School, college, hospital, office. That covers everyone in B2B pretty much. And you go, oh, that's us, we're all right. They have built it for an office, it's okay. Again, that's that reassuring piece that a human can do face-to-face or over the phone, and that's the disadvantage of digital. It's still hard to humanise a web page compared to somebody sitting across from you or even over the phone.
Awesome. I think the things that I really took from that segment, to recap, would be for the idea that as a marketeer, you really have your external customer, but you also have internal customers. And if you perhaps start to treat your sales team or even your customer service team as part of your customer base and people you need to serve as a marketeer, then you're probably going to get better results, and if nothing else, be more liked. So, hopefully there's some sort of win-win in there. And the other thing was that treasure trove of customer service data. And, are you going to sit on those post-sale calls? Are you understanding why people bought it? Are you understanding how they bought it? Are you understanding perhaps the constraints of why they bought it that way? For example, they need a PO number, they need a certain type of invoice. And then when you're looking at that in e-commerce, you can then hopefully again start to identify, is there an opportunity here to either expand our offering, refine our offering, or even start our offering. So amazing points there. Let's now kind of get into the questions that we ask every show. So first thing is, what's the main thing you see, Steve, that just completely kneecaps B2B's efforts in e-commerce? What's the most common mistakes that people make? What's the biggest, I guess, antivirus or virus to success? What can people do to really mess it up so that they know how to avoid it?
That's a great question. There's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of things I could answer. I think one of them, a kind of quick short answer, is look at the balance between building it yourself versus bringing in. So Magento, for example, which is an e-commerce platform that you'd assume is very consumer, and that's their heartland. Brands like that, and I'm not endorsing them, but they have got decades of experience of building e-commerce platforms.
Yep.
They do support B2B. They may not support it as well as if you built it yourself, but the first thing I see often is that paralysis of development is, and I've described companies I've worked for as being quite communist. We build it ourselves versus coming in, and I don't think it's a right or wrong, but think about that. Are you going to get the right solution quick enough and cost effectively enough? You don't know what you don't know. So I've seen with e-commerce, people build what they think's good and actually find it's terrible. The other side is you can buy the shiny cool thing. Marketing people have ADOS, so ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. We are very good at attention deficit. Ooh, shiny. We like technology, and we'll often go buy it and lose credibility at the IT table or the finance director's table because we bought crap. Everyone else has bought it, doesn't mean it's good for us. So Be careful with the IT selection. The main point for me, and it comes out of both of those when it's live, is how easy is it to use. So my background 20 plus years ago is human-computer interaction, HCI. Sounds incredibly Android, weird, sexual thing, but it's genuinely, how do humans and computers interact? It's simply, I've spent a lot of time back then, and still to a degree today, watching people use the internet. That also sounds weird, but in terms of usability testing and understanding simple things around when you build your e-commerce store for B2B, the challenge you've got is you'll know your business inside out, and therefore you'll end up putting in steps that make perfect sense to you but don't to the customer. So the most valuable thing you can do for anything that exists is user test it. If you're building it, get user testing as part of the pre-go live. Don't use your own department, your sales team. Use people that have never used it before. And a very simple test, 5 average human beings, could be colleagues. Pick people from HR, finance, reception, facilities, basically people that you've got access to that are reasonably intelligent but have probably never used your website to buy before.
Sure.
They're accessible, and you sit with a very open question or two that says, I want you to try and find the price for this. Can you get a quote for this? Can you buy that? Really open-ended questions. And then you have to sit back on your hands and your mouth, which is really hard because you'll get very subjective feedback. But if you do that with 5 people and 3 of the 5 have a problem at the same point on your website, you have a fundamental usability problem that's going to mean it's not going to be as effective as it needs. You might then need to call in expert usability advice, but anyone can do that. Anyone can do that at any point at all. And that for me has been really the most valuable game changer for e-commerce. So 15 years ago, in an environment like you and I today, we've got a laptop in front of us, we would build usability tests. I spent 6 months trying to get a significant investment from the board of that PLC company to do something with the web to improve the e-commerce and the content management system, it took the facial expression of a customer on a webcam to win it. And I can recreate it for you now, but it's not a great podcast moment. But it was a pained customer who I'd sat in a room because I'd been to an event where there were customers, and I set up a laptop with a webcam and recorded his screen movement, and he looked pained and disgusted. He was trying to buy a £20 thing. And that, over months of trying, got me to the point of the board when you can have the money. If that's how bad it is for our customers, and they know us, imagine the people that have never come onto our website before. So that I can't advocate enough as a marketeer that how usable something has to be is critical. You can do all the great rigor, but if it's not easy, and that's why my point earlier about the Amazon effect, to be honest, just benchmark Amazon. If you don't know how to build an e-commerce checkout, take the Amazon logo off, right, because you'll be sued. But think about what steps do they go through? Because sometimes Amazon products are quite complex to buy. How can I mirror that and give the unconscious? That's a bit like Amazon. I know how to do this, I'll carry on.
I want to make sure we got that. Some amazing points there. I just want to recap. I love the attention deficit. Ooh, shiny. That's very, very good. Definitely going to steal that. But the key points there really was, if for people listening, build versus buy. I completely agree. We've had conversations where, and perhaps this happens in your business as well, or your industry as well, where the end product is the starting point. And it's got to have all the functionality, all the features, all the bells and the whistles, rather than doing something a bit dirty, but something that allows you to get it in front of the right people really quickly. And that also leads really nicely onto that usability. So a couple of great points there. One is it's got to be simple. And we talk about something that I think Accenture coined liquid expectations, this idea that who you buy from, you don't judge them in industry anymore, you judge them as, if I can do it on Uber, why can't I do it at my bank?
Absolutely.
And the Amazon effect, as you called it, liquid expectations, I think it all sits in that idea of, if someone's doing it really well over here, just because they don't sell the same crap you're selling, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to compare you anymore.
It's just, sorry to interject.
No, go
point
for it.
on that, and in fact, back in that IT, when I was client side, that big IT brand, my boss became the sales director rather than the marketing director, in some kind of squabble of ownership. I had the choice actually to sit with marketing or sales, and I moved to sales because of that point earlier about acquiescing. My team will be more successful if I understand the salespeople. And he once put in front of me, brilliant man, he put in front of me an Economist article from 2005 about e-commerce. And one of the sentences I've never forgotten was, your website is a paradigm of your organisation. And that goes to a micro level of what you've just said, is forget all the rest. If your website's difficult to use and out of date and clunky, is that telling that prospective customer that's what it's like to do business with us? Or is your website slick, easy, thoughtful, warm, friendly, all the right personas as well, that feels like this is the kind of place I would be happy to do business with? It's an unconscious thing, but it's a really important thing as well, is if you're not investing in your e-commerce, you might not sell online, but you certainly might lose online because people don't feel like they want to engage with you.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point as well, because there's going to be loads of people who you will never know discounted you because of that.
Absolutely.
The unknown loss. Awesome points. Okay, top secrets and tips. What's your, top 2 or 3 secrets or tips for B2B brands looking to get started with e-commerce, people listening that they can start looking at or thinking about?
So I think firstly, do that audit, work out what's the sales process at the moment. Are there obvious ways to improve? As I said, it sounds a bit, it's not PR, but if you can make salespeople more effective, that has to be good for the business.
Yeah.
So I think have a kind of introspective look at what's the process, learn where the steps are, and then think where could we put digital on to complement or replace. But if it can't be better than the status quo, don't bother. And then I think you apply that same logic out, probably at the same time, or certainly before you commit to do anything to the industry. How else is it done? What are our competitors doing? And again, the point around some industries can be quite specific on how they buy, frameworks and tenders, for example, and make sure that what you're proposing marries into customers. A simple way to do that, get on more sales visits. And again, I ask this with students that I teach in marketing. When did you last go on a sales visit? When did you last listen in to a phone call? All those things are gold dust for it. Go out onto a prospect meeting, go to events maybe not your own events, industry events where you can just chat and ask questions of people. So I think all the raw ingredients are there. It's just being objective about, as I said, agnostically, is this going to be a better way of us doing things than how we do it at the moment? If so, where? Is it early stages e-commerce? Actually, and data capture, let's just get them to a point where the salesperson takes over. And this is encroaching into territories, as you mentioned earlier, inbound. Draw people in, get them to give you some data, let the salesperson take the rest of the journey. For the other end, is it you've got those customers, as we found for that hospitality company, that are willing to spend tens of thousands, they just want it as quick and easy as possible.
Awesome. Really, really great tips there. And now I just want to wrap everything up today with your best parting thought. So what's one thing that our listeners can take away and put into practice today, if possible? It could be a tactic, it could be a strategy, or it could be an idea. Steve from the internet.
So when I'm buried, on my headstone will be the phrase "benchmarking is not theft," which is a really important discipline. I've worked in organisations and for organisations typically that don't have the budgets of the big global brands. I'm a fan of creativity and originality, but if somebody's already doing something well, borrow from them. Benchmarking is not going to get you in trouble with the lawyers. It's going to mean they've solved a problem for you that moves you on. So the other bit that's really important for a B2B marketeer is don't just look myopically in your own industry at your competitors. Don't be afraid to look at a completely different industry over there that might be consumer, might be B2B, might be charities. Who's doing something really well? How can we engineer that back into what we do? Will save you vast sums of money, time and stress.
Amazing. I hope I don't see your headstone anytime soon. But really, really, really good point. Benchmarking is not theft. And I think that really encapsulates really nicely the thrust of this whole conversation, which I think has been, you need to have your head up, you need to be looking outside B2B, you need to be looking at your competitors, but also at the wider landscape, and starting to challenge yourself internally and externally as to understand, well, what are the things that we could use to move the needle in different ways? Not have the sacred cows, but also not start killing cows just because someone else is killing all their cows, to extend that analogy. I hope that works. And really think about the key tenets of what we talked about, which is it simple and painless, because it needs to be in this day and age. And if there is an opportunity for e-com, it needs to be in the customer and the business's interest first, that human-to-human vibe, and making sure that transcends everything. So, Steve, huge amount of value. Thanks so much for being on the show. It's been great having you, and I've really enjoyed the conversation.
So
Thanks, Steve. Cheers. Thank you.